He laughed at my thrift store blazer and ordered me off the kids' menu to humiliate me. He had no idea I was the mystery investor who just bought his company for $45 million. My name is Lily, and tonight, I'm not just his broke sister-in-law, I'm his new boss. Hit that subscribe button if you want to watch me fire him in front of his entire team. The notification on my phone screen was simple. Just a green check mark and 5 words. Acquisition of Sterling Logistics complete. I stared at it, letting out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 6 months. I was sitting on the floor of my penthouse apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes of server equipment and design sketches. To the outside world, I was Lily, the starving artist sister who scraped by selling digital drawings online. To the terrified board of directors I'd just finished a conference call with, I was LM Designs, the faceless entity that had just bought their failing company for $45 million. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a business alert. It was a text from my sister, Jessica. Please try not to embarrass me tonight. Brad's colleagues are coming. Wear something normal. No thrift store rags. I sighed, tossing the phone onto the plush rug. Tonight was their engagement dinner, a fancy black tie affair at the Obsidian, the kind of restaurant where they charge you $5 just to breathe the air. I walked into my walk-in closet. On the left hung my meeting clothes, sharp, tailored Italian suits that screamed power. On the right was what I actually liked to wear, comfortable, vintage finds that had character. My hand hovered over a sleek black dress that cost more than Brad's car. It would shut them up, it would make Jessica smile. But then I remembered the last time I saw Brad. He'd made a joke about me needing food stamps because I drove a 5-year-old Honda. He didn't know I drove it because I liked the mileage, not because I was broke. No, I whispered to the empty room. If they can't respect me in cotton, they don't deserve me in silk. I grabbed my favorite blazer. It was an oversized, charcoal gray thrift find from the 90s. It was clean, structured, and incredibly comfortable. Underneath, I threw on a plain white t-shirt and my trusty dark wash jeans. I looked in the mirror. I looked like a creative. I looked like me. My phone rang. It was Mr. Sterling, the current CEO of the company I now own, the company Brad worked for. Ms. Lily. Sterling's voice was shaking slightly. I have the transfer documents ready. I can bring them to your office tomorrow. Actually, Sterling, I checked my watch. I'm heading to dinner at the Obsidian. Why don't you meet me there in an hour? I'll sign them in person. At the Obsidian? But that's where the regional managers are having their celebratory dinner. Brad, one of our managers, is hosting his engagement party there. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I know. I'll see you there, Sterling. Don't be late. I hung up, grabbed my tote bag, the one with the fraying strap, and slipped my tablet inside. I was walking into the lion's den wearing sheep's clothing, and I couldn't wait to see their teeth. The valet at the Obsidian looked at my Honda Civic like I had just handed him a bag of wet trash. He held the ticket by the very corner, his nose wrinkling slightly as he glanced at the dent on the rear bumper, a battle scar from a server rack loading accident 3 years ago. We'll keep it in the back lot, ma'am, he sniffed. Perfect, I said, flipping him a 20. Wouldn't want it getting lonely next to all those Porsches. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors, the air inside instantly cooling by 10 degrees. The restaurant smelled like old money, leather, truffle oil, and expensive cologne. A hostess with a clipboard scanned my jeans and oversized blazer with a practiced look of confusion. "The delivery entrance is around the back," she said, not even looking up. "I'm here for the Miller-Stone engagement," I said, keeping my voice level. Her eyes snapped up, widening. Oh, the private dining room. Right this way." She led me through the main dining hall. I could feel the eyes tracking me. In a sea of black ties and sequin gowns, I was a smudge of gray static. I kept my head high, gripping the strap of my canvas tote bag tighter. If they knew what was on the tablet inside that bag, they'd be rolling out a red carpet. The hostess opened the double doors to the private room. The chatter inside cut off instantly. 20 people sat around a long, gleaming table covered in white linen. At the head sat Brad, looking like a catalog model for generic corporate success, in a navy suit that was a little too tight in the shoulders. Next to him was my sister, Jessica. She looked stunning in emerald green until she saw me. Her smile didn't just drop, it shattered. Jessica stood up and rushed over to me, grabbing my elbow and pulling me away from the table before I could even say hello. Her grip was tight, her manicured nails digging into my blazer. "Lily, what is this? What are you wearing?" "Clothes, Jess. Clean ones," I said, pulling my arm back. "I told you the regional VP was going to be here. I told you Brad is up for a promotion. You look like..." She gestured vaguely at my entire existence. "You look like you're here to fix the plumbing." "Relax. I'll sit at the end. I won't talk business. I'm just here to support you." "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence." Brad's voice boomed across the room. He stood up, swirling a glass of scotch, a smirk plastered on his face. The room turned to watch. This was Brad's favorite sport: humiliate the in-laws. "Hey, Brad," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Congratulations." "Thanks, Lil," he said, using the nickname I hated. He walked over, draping a heavy arm around my shoulders. He leaned in, loud enough for his colleagues to hear. "I gotta ask, though, is the starving artist look part of a performance piece, or are sales on the Etsy shop down this month?" A ripple of polite, cruel laughter went through the room. "I've actually had a very busy month, Brad," I said quietly. Sure. Finger painting takes a lot of focus." He slapped my back hard. "Go grab a seat at the end. I think there's a folding chair available. Don't worry about the bill tonight. I know things are tight." He winked at his colleagues. "I'm a philanthropist. What can I say? I support the arts." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the arrogance in his eyes, the way he puffed his chest out. He thought he was the king of this little kingdom. He had no idea the castle had just been sold. "Thanks, Brad," I said, my voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach my eyes. "I appreciate the charity." I walked to the far end of the table and sat down. I placed my tote bag on the floor and checked my watch. Sterling would be here in 40 minutes. The waiter approached me with the caution of someone defusing a bomb. He was holding 2 menus, the leather-bound wine list and the standard dinner menu. Before he could place them in front of me, Brad's voice cut through the room again. "Garrett, hold on a second," Brad called out, snapping his fingers. The waiter froze. Brad grinned down the length of the table. "Don't overwhelm her with the big words, Garrett. Do we still have those kids' menus? The ones with the maze on the back?" More laughter. Jessica looked down at her plate, her cheeks flushing pink. She didn't defend me. She never did. She just wanted the moment to pass. "Sir, the waiter stammered, looking uncomfortable. I'm kidding, Brad laughed, waving a hand. Just bring her the chicken tenders and a soda. Put it on my corporate card. It's a write-off, right, guys? Charitable donation to the unemployed? The man next to me, a guy named Rick, who wore a tie clip shaped like a dollar sign, leaned in. Must be nice, writing your sister's coattails. What do you actually do all day? Draw cartoons? I unfolded my napkin and placed it on my lap, smoothing out the wrinkles. I could have told him I spent the last 3 days rewriting the encryption code for his company's entire shipping database because their previous security was a joke. I could have told him that cartoons were actually architectural schematics for a data center in Zurich. Instead, I smiled. Mostly, I just try to stay out of the way of important people like you, Rick. Rick snorted and turned back to his conversation about golf handicaps. The next 30 minutes were a masterclass in exclusion. They talked about quarterly projections, synergy, and who was buying the newest Tesla. I sat in silence, sipping my water, listening. I listened to Brad brag about a deal he supposedly closed last week. I walked in there, told them the price was non-negotiable, and they folded like cheap suits. It's all about dominance, gentlemen. I knew, for a fact, that client had walked away. I had read the file this morning. I listened to them complain about the upper management being out of touch. Old man Sterling is losing his grip, Rick said, chewing on a piece of steak. He's been frantic lately, scared of some hostile takeover. If you ask me, we need new blood at the top, someone who isn't afraid to cut the dead weight. Exactly, Brad agreed, raising his glass. That's why this merger rumor is so exciting. If a big firm buys us out, they're going to look for leaders, young, hungry leaders. I'm already drafting my pitch to the new owners. I took a sip of water to hide my smile. Oh, Brad, you have no idea. My phone buzzed in my lap, a text from Sterling. I'm at the valet. I'm coming up. Please, Miss Lily, tell me you aren't going to fire me in front of them. I typed back, You're safe, Sterling, but I can't say the same for the regional manager. I looked up at Brad, who was currently laughing at his own joke, his mouth full of shrimp. I slid my hand into my tote bag and touched the cool metal of the tablet. Garrett, I signaled the waiter quietly. Could you clear my place setting? I'm going to need the table space. The double doors to the private room swung open with a heavy thud. The conversation died instantly. All heads turned toward the entrance. Standing there, looking breathless and flushed, was Mr. Sterling. He was a man who usually projected absolute calm, silver hair perfectly coiffed, suits that cost more than my first apartment. But tonight, his tie was slightly askew, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He clutched a leather portfolio to his chest like a shield. Brad reacted first. He practically leaped out of his chair, knocking his napkin to the floor. Mr. Sterling! Brad's voice cracked, then dropped an octave as he tried to regain his composure. He buttoned his jacket with fumbling fingers. Sir, what an honor! I didn't know you were coming. We would have set a place for you. Brad turned to the table, his eyes wide with excitement. Everyone, this is CEO Arthur Sterling, the man, the myth. He looked back at Sterling, beaming. Sir, are you here to celebrate the engagement? You shouldn't have. But please join us. Garrett, get Mr. Sterling a chair and a Scotch neat. Sterling didn't move. He didn't even look at Brad. His eyes were darting around the room, scanning the faces with a look of desperate intensity. I'm not here for a drink, Brad, Sterling said, his voice tight. I was summoned. Summoned? By who? The board? Did the acquisition news drop? Is that why you're here? To announce the new leadership team? Brad puffed his chest out again, glancing at Jessica. I told you, babe. Big things happening.
Sit down, Brad, Sterling snapped. The sharpness of his tone made several people at the table flinch. Brad froze, his smile faltering. Sir? I said sit down. Sterling took a step into the room. The acquisition is finalized. The papers were signed an hour ago. The new owner, the sole owner, requested an immediate meeting to finalize the transfer of authority. A murmur went through the table. Rick, the guy with the $ tie clip, looked pale. Sole owner? Who is it? Is it Amazon? Google? He ignored him. He continued his visual sweep of the room, his eyes passing over the men in suits, the women in gowns. Finally, his gaze landed on the far end of the table. On me. I saw the tension leave his shoulders. He let out a long exhale. Miss Lily, he said. His voice completely different now, respectful, almost deferential. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air pressure had suddenly dropped. Brad looked at Sterling, then at me, then back at Sterling. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. Sir, you're talking to my fiancé's sister. That's Lily. I know who she is, Brad, Sterling said, walking past him. Sterling didn't stop until he was standing right in front of my chair. He ignored the dirty plate of chicken tenders the waiter hadn't cleared yet. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of submission that sent a shockwave through the room. Miss Lily, Sterling said again. I apologize for the delay. Traffic on the bridge was a nightmare. I have the updated personnel files and the transfer deed you requested. I didn't stand up. I stayed seated, leaning back in my chair, looking up at him. You're late, Arthur, I said softly. I know. It won't happen again. Good. I held out my hand. Give me the tablet. Sterling opened his portfolio and handed me a sleek black device. I took it, placed it on the table, and tapped the screen to wake it up. The logo of Sterling Logistics appeared, followed by a new logo I had designed myself, L.M. Holdings. I looked up. Every single pair of eyes was glued to me. Jessica's mouth was slightly open. Brad looked like he had been slapped with a wet fish. Brad, I said, breaking the silence, you were just talking about cutting dead weight, weren't you? Brad blinked, his brain unable to process the image of his boss bowing to the girl in the thrift store blazer. What? Lily, is this a joke? Did you hire an actor? I tapped the screen of the tablet. A projector screen on the far wall that had been displaying a slideshow of Brad and Jessica's engagement photos suddenly flickered. The photos disappeared. In their place, a giant, high-resolution organizational chart of Sterling Logistics appeared. At the very top, in a box labeled Owner, was a single name. Lily M. And right below it, under CEO, was Arthur Sterling. I looked up at Brad. Does this look like a joke to you, Brad?
The hum of the projector fan sounded like a jet engine in the silent room. The light from the screen washed over the table, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. My name, Lily M., glowed in crisp white font above everyone else's. Brad stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled onto a dock. He looked at the chart, then at me, then at Sterling, and finally at Jessica. Is this? Brad's voice was a dry croak. He cleared his throat and tried to find his regional manager volume. Is this some kind of prank? Did you hack the system, Lily? Because that's a felony. I hope you know I'll have to call security. He turned to Sterling.
a desperate grin stretching his face. "Sir, she's good with computers. Little hacker. It's a funny joke, right? Breaking the tension?" Sterling didn't even blink. He remained standing next to my chair, his hands clasped behind his back. "I assure you, Mr. Miller, my presence here is not a joke, and neither is the $45 million wire transfer that cleared our accounts this afternoon." The number hung in the air. 45 million. I heard a glass tip over. Someone down the table, maybe Rick, had knocked over their water. The liquid dripped onto the floor, a steady drip, drip, drip that punctuated the silence. Jessica let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She looked at me, her eyes wide and terrified, seeing me for the first time, not as her embarrassing little sister, but as a stranger who could buy and sell her fiancé's entire world. "Lily?" she whispered. "Is it true?" I finally stood up. I didn't rush. I pushed my chair back, slowly, the legs scraping against the expensive hardwood floor. I picked up the kids menu Brad had ordered for me. I studied the cartoon maze on the back of the paper. "You know, Brad, I do like to draw." I looked up, locking eyes with him. "I designed the logistics algorithm your company uses, the one you've been bragging about all night, the Sterling Speed system. I wrote that code 3 years ago in my pajamas. I licensed it to a shell company who licensed it to you." I took a step toward him. He actually took a step back, bumping into his chair. "I didn't buy this company because I wanted a title. I bought it because I was tired of watching middlemen like you take credit for the work people like me do. I decided to cut out the middleman." Brad's face went from pale to a blotchy red. The reality was setting in, but his ego was fighting for survival. He let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. Okay, wow." He held up his hands, palms out. "You got us, Lil. You got us good. Secret millionaire. Who knew?" He looked around the table, trying to rally his troops, but his colleagues were staring at their plates, terrified to make eye contact with me. "Look," Brad stammered, shifting into sales mode. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, trying to look relaxed. This is actually great. Family business, right? Think about the synergy, Lily. Me in sales, you at the top. We can really turn this place around. I have so many ideas I haven't been able to run past Sterling." He reached for a bottle of wine and tried to pour me a glass, but his hand was shaking so badly he spilled a splash of Cabernet on the white tablecloth. It looked like a gunshot wound. "We're family," Brad said, his voice pleading now. "Jessica, tell her. We're all family here. Just a little roasting at dinner, right? That's what families do. It shows love." "Love?" I repeated the word, tasting the bitterness of it. I glanced at the chicken tenders on my plate, cold, greasy, and pathetic. "You ordered me off the kid menu, Brad. You told your friends I was a charity case. You made my sister ashamed to be seen with me." I turned to Sterling. "Arthur, bring up the personnel file for the Southeast region." Sterling moved instantly. He tapped the tablet on the table. The projector screen shifted. The organizational chart disappeared, replaced with a spreadsheet, rows and rows of numbers, sales figures, and client names. And there, highlighted in red, was Brad's name. "You wanted to talk business, Brad?" I asked, pointing to the screen. "Let's talk business." The hum of the projector fan sounded like a jet engine in the silent room. The light from the screen washed over the table, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. My name, Lily M., glowed in crisp white font above everyone else's. Brad stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled onto a dock. He looked at the chart, then at me, then at Sterling, and finally at Jessica. "Is this?" Brad's voice was a dry croak. He cleared his throat and tried to find his regional manager volume. "Is this some kind of prank? Did you hack the system, Lily? Because that's a felony. I hope you know I'll have to call security." He turned to Sterling. a desperate grin stretching his face. "Sir, she's good with computers. Little hacker. It's a funny joke, right? Breaking the tension?" Sterling didn't even blink. He remained standing next to my chair, his hands clasped behind his back. "I assure you, Mr. Miller, my presence here is not a joke, and neither is the $45 million wire transfer that cleared our accounts this afternoon." The number hung in the air. 45 million. I heard a glass tip over. Someone down the table, maybe Rick, had knocked over their water. The liquid dripped onto the floor, a steady drip, drip, drip that punctuated the silence. Jessica let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She looked at me, her eyes wide and terrified, seeing me for the first time, not as her embarrassing little sister, but as a stranger who could buy and sell her fiancé's entire world. "Lily?" she whispered. "Is it true?" I finally stood up. I didn't rush. I pushed my chair back, slowly, the legs scraping against the expensive hardwood floor. I picked up the kids menu Brad had ordered for me. I studied the cartoon maze on the back of the paper. "You know, Brad, I do like to draw." I looked up, locking eyes with him. "I designed the logistics algorithm your company uses, the one you've been bragging about all night, the Sterling Speed system. I wrote that code 3 years ago in my pajamas. I licensed it to a shell company who licensed it to you." I took a step toward him. He actually took a step back, bumping into his chair. "I didn't buy this company because I wanted a title. I bought it because I was tired of watching middlemen like you take credit for the work people like me do. I decided to cut out the middleman." Brad's face went from pale to a blotchy red. The reality was setting in, but his ego was fighting for survival. He let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. Okay, wow." He held up his hands, palms out. "You got us, Lil. You got us good. Secret millionaire. Who knew?" He looked around the table, trying to rally his troops, but his colleagues were staring at their plates, terrified to make eye contact with me. "Look," Brad stammered, shifting into sales mode. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, trying to look relaxed. This is actually great. Family business, right? Think about the synergy, Lily. Me in sales, you at the top. We can really turn this place around. I have so many ideas I haven't been able to run past Sterling." He reached for a bottle of wine and tried to pour me a glass, but his hand was shaking so badly he spilled a splash of Cabernet on the white tablecloth. It looked like a gunshot wound. "We're family," Brad said, his voice pleading now. "Jessica, tell her. We're all family here. Just a little roasting at dinner, right? That's what families do. It shows love." "Love?" I repeated the word, tasting the bitterness of it. I glanced at the chicken tenders on my plate, cold, greasy, and pathetic. "You ordered me off the kid menu, Brad. You told your friends I was a charity case. You made my sister ashamed to be seen with me." I turned to Sterling. "Arthur, bring up the personnel file for the Southeast region." Sterling moved instantly. He tapped the tablet on the table, the projector screen shifted, the organizational chart disappeared, replaced with a spreadsheet, rows and rows of numbers, sales figures, and client names. And there, highlighted in red, was Brad's name. "You wanted to talk business, Brad?" I asked, pointing to the screen. "Let's talk business." The silence that followed was heavier than the heavy oak doors of the private room. It was the kind of silence where you could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents. Brad stared at his phone, his thumb tapping the screen uselessly, trying to refresh an email inbox that no longer existed for him. His face had gone through the stages of grief in under 10 seconds and had landed squarely on anger. "You can't do this," he spat, looking up at me. His eyes were wild. "I have rights. I have a contract." "You had a contract," I corrected calmly. "Clause 4, Section B, termination for cause. Falsifying sales data constitutes gross misconduct.
Honestly, Brad, you should be thanking me. If I took this to the authorities, you'd be facing fraud charges. Instead, I'm just taking your badge." Brad spun around to face the table, his arms spread wide in a desperate appeal to his audience. "Rick, Sarah, are you guys seeing this?" His voice cracked. "She's insane. You can't let her do this to me. I'm the team lead. We have the quarterly review next week." Rick, the man who had mocked my cartoons earlier, didn't look up. He was suddenly incredibly interested in cutting his steak into microscopic pieces. Sarah picked up her wineglass and turned her body away from him. The herd had sensed the wounded animal, and they were distancing themselves. "Mr. Sterling," Brad shouted, turning to the older man, "you've known me for 5 years. You came to my house for the Christmas party. Tell her she's making a mistake." Sterling sighed, a sound of deep, weary exhaustion. He stepped forward, placing himself physically between Brad and me. "The only mistake, Mr. Miller," Sterling said, his voice ice cold, "was that I didn't catch your inflated numbers sooner. Miss Lily has saved this company from a lawsuit. I suggest you leave before she decides to change her mind about pressing charges." Brad stood there panting slightly. His world, built on bluster, lies, and cheap suits, had evaporated. He looked at the empty chair at the head of the table, then at the spilled wine, and finally at Jessica. Jessica was standing by her chair, her hands covering her mouth. She looked like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. "Jess," Brad said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He walked over and grabbed her arm. "We're leaving, now. Tell your sister she's dead to us." Jessica flinched at his touch. She looked down at his hand gripping her emerald green dress, the dress she had bought specifically to impress his colleagues. "Let go of me, Brad," she whispered. "What?" Brad blinked. "I said, let go." She pulled her arm back hard. She looked at him with wet, clear eyes. "You told me Lily was jealous. You told me she was a loser who needed our help. You lied about everything." "I did it for us," Brad yelled, losing control. "To get us the house, the life." "You did it for you," I said, stepping in, "because you need everyone to think you're important." I walked over to the table and picked up the tablet. I tapped the screen one last time. "Your severance package has been emailed to your personal account. It includes 2 weeks' pay. I think you'll find that generous, considering you tried to humiliate the owner of the company in front of your staff." Brad looked around the room one last time. He saw the waiters trying not to stare, his colleagues refusing to meet his eyes, and his fiancée refusing to hold his hand. He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Fine, keep the company. It was sinking anyway." He grabbed his jacket off the chair. "I don't need this. I can get a job anywhere. I'm a closer." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. He looked back at me, trying to summon one last shred of dignity. "You still look like a bum, Lily. And you look like a trespasser. Goodbye, Brad." He slammed a door behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot, signaling the end of the war. The room exhaled. Sterling cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "I apologize for the disturbance, everyone. Please, enjoy the rest of your dinner. It is, as Miss Lily said, on the company." He turned to me. "Miss Lily, shall we discuss the transition in a quieter setting?" I looked at Jessica. She was sinking into her chair, burying her face in her hands. "Give me a minute, Sterling."
The silence in the room was different now. Before, it had been the silence of judgment. Now, it was the silence of fear. Rick and Sarah and the rest of the corporate ladder climbers were staring at their plates, terrified that if they made eye contact, I might accidentally buy their houses or cancel their gym memberships. I ignored them. I pulled up a chair next to Jessica. She was weeping silently, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face, ruining the perfection she had spent hours curating. She didn't look like a bride-to-be anymore. She looked like a little girl who had dropped her ice cream cone in the dirt. "Jess," I said softly. She flinched, then looked up at me. Her eyes searched my face, looking for the sister she thought she knew. "You own the company?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "You actually own it." "I do." "Why didn't you tell me? I've been treating you like you were helpless. I've been sending you grocery money." "I know, and I deposited every check into a savings account for you. It's got about $2,000 in it. You can use it for the deposit on a new apartment." Jessica let out a wet, hiccuping laugh. "I feel so stupid. Brad kept saying you were a failure, and I believed him because it made me feel better about myself. I thought I was the successful one, the one who made it." She looked down at her emerald dress. "But I was just marrying a fraud in a rented tuxedo." "You were chasing the image, Jess. You and Brad, you both thought value was something you wore, but net worth isn't self-worth." I stood up and adjusted my thrift store blazer. It felt different now. Before it was a shield, now it was just clothes. It didn't matter what I wore. The power wasn't in the fabric, it was in the person wearing it. "I'm going to head out. I have an integration meeting with Sterling at 8 a.m. I looked at the table of terrified managers one last time. "Enjoy the steak," I told them, "and Rick, work on that churn rate." Rick nodded frantically, looking like he might salute. I walked out of the private room, the heavy doors closing behind me with a satisfying click, sealing the noise and the drama away. In the lobby, Mr. Sterling was waiting for me. He looked more relaxed than he had all night. "I'll handle the HR paperwork first thing in the morning, Miss Lily, and I'll start the search for a new regional manager." "Good. Find someone who listens more than they talk, Arthur, and maybe someone who doesn't care about the dress code." He cracked a rare smile. "Understood. Shall I call you a car? The company account has a service." "No thanks." I fished my keys out of my tote bag. I drove. I walked out into the cool night air. The valet brought my Honda Civic around. It squeaked slightly as it braked. The dent on the bumper caught the light of the street lamps. The valet, the same one who had looked at me like I was trash an hour ago, rushed over to open the door for me. He must have heard the rumor spreading from the kitchen staff. "Your car? Miss... ma'am," he stammered, holding the door open with reverence. "Thanks," I said, sliding into the worn fabric seat. It smelled like old coffee and peppermint, a smell that meant late nights and hard work. I started the engine. It rumbled to life, a little rough, but reliable. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. It was a text from Jessica. "Thank you for saving me from a mistake, and can I borrow that blazer sometime? It actually looks kind of cool." I smiled, putting the car in gear. I wasn't the poor sister. I wasn't the black sheep. I was the one who built the castle they were all just renting rooms in. I drove away from the Obsidian, leaving the luxury cars and the expensive lies in the rearview mirror, heading home to my half-packed boxes and the work that I loved.